Okay, main difference between loyalty points and discount voucher. From an accounting perspective, no difference, right? It's still the right to acquire additional goods and services. That's why you see, because IFRS is principles based, right? So forget about what it's called and think about the principle. So the principle is I'm entering into a promise to supply additional goods and services. Okay, if that's what you're entering into, then you are in that part of IFRS. Variable consideration is I've delivered a good, or I'm going to deliver a good, and then the consideration I'm going to receive depends on some sort of future action. So whether it is you settle early, or whether or not it's I finish performing sooner, or I meet a performance target, that is variable consideration, right? It's my consideration is varying, and it will be confirmed by a future event. Whereas discount vouchers and loyalty points, that's a promise to provide additional goods and services. Okay, so that's the difference there. And I think that's the same question there. Would presentation of a technically wrong journal relegate you to LC? No. So let's get out of the thought of one single thing sinking you. So a principle that you apply, getting one principle wrong is not a deal. It's not a deal breaker, right? It's not attempting is a deal breaker, right? So there are very few things that you can do that are a complete deal breaker, but just getting one journal wrong, getting a principle wrong, getting your conclusion wrong, typically those things in isolation are not a deal breaker, but misinterpreting the task, that is a deal breaker, because then you completely go on a tangent, and then then that is no good. So that's the answer to that. Please explain why they mean by breakage. And can you also combine revenue and liability in discounted one journal? Yeah, so separate journals, net journals, doesn't matter. Okay, it's the same thing. It's an instruction, right? Whether or not you have 3 legs or 4 legs, and you've got 2 legs that net together, does not matter, so long as you have all the legs. And then breakage is just the probability that your loyalty program is going to be claimed. So if there's an 80% likelihood, so using the numbers in this example, no stress, if there's an 80% likelihood that the voucher will be redeemed prior to the expiry in a year, then you've got a 20% breakage. Okay, that's what breakage is. Is it possible to get APC using brown envelope? Okay, funny. Come, let's talk. Okay, go for it, have a discussion. I've got my ethics watchdogs in there as well. Cool. How do you know if you have written sufficient information? I think we've spoken about that all throughout the session, right? It's about your points having enough depth. It's about your plan, making sure you've covered all components. It's about identifying, sort of dealing with all the issues. There's no blanket answer, but we've almost worked through the principles. Austin, in relation to B, consideration should be had that this information will be used to franchisees to explain how the program. That's bringing me to the previous question. My mic was not working, sorry about that. I'm still struggling to get my head around the audience part. How do I communicate to accountant versus professions? I hear you can't be technical versus non-technical. Are you able to give 2 examples where I can put in my notes? Yeah, so so with the communication, I'll give you some examples because it's such an important point, right? And even with this point, I think if I just go back to the ask here quickly, because I want to make sure that I've got this completely right. So this will assist us in answering questions for franchisees. So your audience is not the franchisees, right? Elijah wants to be geared or have, because he's prepared notes. What did he say here? He's prepared notes for himself, right? To make sense of how to treat this thing, right? So he's saying, okay, please review my notes, make sure I'm on the right track, make sure I understand this so that I can go to the franchisees and explain this. Okay, so your audience is still Elijah, right? Because he needs to understand. So that's a very important thing to conceptualize. So be very careful of this because there's a part thing here. Even in the previous one, right? Elijah said, yes, you're sending it to me, but I'm just going to forward it to Ralph. That's important. It means that your audience is actually Ralph, right? But if Elijah said, oh no, just send it to me so that I can also just have a read and then I'm going to have a chat with Ralph. That's different. Now your audience is Elijah. So be careful with that. So to give examples and practical examples, if your audience is, if you ask for a technical memo and your audience is a technical partner, right, very technical person, what does an auditor want? An auditor wants to make sure that you have considered all of the requirements, that you're comfortable you meet the definition of a lease. Okay. So how can you speak to a technical partner? For a transaction to be within the scope of IFRS 16, we need to meet the definition of a lease. Okay, you can bring in words like to recognize, on initial recognition of a lease, we need to recognize the right of use asset, which means sort of determine the PV of the cash payments, etc., etc., etc. Subsequent to initial recognition, this is how we treat the right of use asset, right? So, like, notice the language I'm using. Same scenario, but to the board. Instead of saying, in order for this transaction to be scoped into IFRS 16, you say something for like, in order for this transaction to be accounted for as a leasing agreement in terms of IFRS, the definition of a lease needs to be met. Okay. Instead of using words like recognize, initial recognition, I'm going to bring the lease onto our statement of financial position on the first time when the asset is made available to the lessee. Right? Notice I'm not saying at commencement date of the lease, because that's a technical language, right? That's what the partner would understand. To the board, I'm saying on the date I provide the lessee with access to this asset. That they can comprehend. Like, okay, fine. So the first time this thing's going to come into my statement of financial position is when the lessee has access to the asset. It's just simple to understand. Anyone can understand that. Okay, so do you see how I'm explaining the same thing, but the level of the jargon that I'm using is very different, and the language I'm using is very different when I'm speaking to the board and when I'm speaking to a technical partner. What's common? Speaking to the board, because why? It's very hard to explain complex concepts in a very simple manner. And if you can explain complex concepts in a very simple manner, that usually is a very big indicator of cognition, like you understand. If you can explain something simply, you understand that thing. Okay, so that's why usually it's towards somebody that needs explanations and not a super technical outcome. Okay, I'm going to take a few more questions in the room and then we're going to call it. Are there any questions in the room? I know there was like a hand, or are we good? The hand. Do you have a mic, please, for the hand?
Hi, Austin. So this kind of discussion question, because we haven't seen that many of them, I think my confusion here is how you would avoid crossing the line of theory dumping in this type of a question specifically, than like applying it. I don't know if that makes sense.
That's a very important question. I think also applicable for just discussion questions in general. Theory dumping is a big problem. And now here to balance explaining in detail, but not theory dumping, I think is a fantastic question. And I think for me, what I would do is I would always, what word can I use? If I'm using my standard as a basis of which I'm applying, right? Never, ever, ever. So the standard will say stuff like, okay, let me use IFRS 15. Okay, because here we need to explain, right? So we need to use the standard for explanation, and I'm going to go to Appendix B, and then I'm going to go to material rights, sorry, additional whatever, P39. Okay, so we need to explain this, right? We need to explain this. Sorry, B40, but we can't theory dump. Okay, so what do we do? Okay, it says that if in a contract an entity grants a customer, okay, that's theory dumping. Replace all of that stuff. The contract with the customer, the contract to sell food to the customer. Then maybe another example, you have an actual name of the customer. Maybe you have a name of the contract. Okay, maybe it's a purchase contract or whatever, the sale contract. The contract. Are we in Fodjan? We're in Fodjan, yeah. The contract Fodjan grants the restaurant patrons grants that customer an option to acquire additional meals and drinks will be treated as a separate performance obligation if that contract results in that customer receiving a material right from Fodjan. Okay, now all of a sudden it's applied. right? I'm explaining, and I'm not just like copy pasting B40, but I'm telling you that these are the principles that we need to meet. Okay. The definition of a material right will be met if Fodjan does not ordinarily offer discounts like these 50 Rand discounts to customers unless they spend 1,000 Rands, which is the case here. Therefore, this contract, the initial contract to buy sort of food, will grant every 1,000 Rands, will grant Fodjan's customers a material right, to which Fodjan needs to account as a separate performance obligation. Okay, so yeah, I know I kind of sort of fumbled through that, but the point that I'm trying to raise is don't use words like the entity, the customer, year of assessed, financial year, additional goods and services. I'm just going to be asked performance obligation. I'm just going to be asking who's the entity, who's the customer, what additional goods and services, what material right. It's relevant. So do that. So if you want to explain the principles that need to be met before you do something, like in this case you had to, replace all of those words with the actual parties, products, goods, whatever, and then go ahead and apply it later on. Okay, it's a great question that you asked. Cool. Any other questions? I saw I had one more. I think Catherine, you had a hand. I'll accept one from Catherine, then I'm just gonna, oh, gone. Okay. I'll just read one more, then I'll call it. Otherwise, this will go in favor. Hi, Austin. On the expectation tasks, we already looked at preparing performer journal or the review of the performer journals and why we did not include preparing the custody apps. You forgot to address this question in the morning. Oh, wait, what? On the expectation tasks, we only looked at preparing the performer journal or the review of the performer journal. Why did we not include preparing consolidated apps? Asanda, I'm not sure whether you're referring to in the research phase or in the responding phase. Research, I wouldn't follow. Oh, I see what you mean. Agreed. So I think you mean consolidation procedures. You need to do that too. So it'll be both. So during the research, you need to research both at acquisition and consolidation procedures. So eliminating intercompany. So if you think about it, the approach we did with the income statement, you can do that too with IFRS 10. So if you work through the lines, you can say, find what are the items I need to eliminate intercompany transactions, and then some of the stuff would be those franchising fees would come up. Need to be eliminated, no NCI because it's 100%. So yes, so exactly what we do for IFRS 3, we need to do for IFRS 10 as well. On the day though, yeah, we also need to do the same thing. So review the journal entries, but from a completer's perspective, it's both the at acquisition entries and the consolidation procedures entries. So it was both. So yeah, I know I focus on IFRS 3, but same principles apply to IFRS 10. Okay, right. I think we're going to call that a day. The recording has also stopped. I think we're good. Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking around the questions and engaging. Again, all the best if we don't sort of speak again.